Welcome everyone to episode 2 of Psyclonic. I'm your host, Jek Spacerunner. Today we have a very special guest. Stephen Bassett is a political activist, disclosure advocate, and the executive director of Paradigm Research Group, or PRG, founded in 1996 to end a government-imposed embargo on the truth behind extraterrestrial-related phenomena. He has spoken to audiences around the world about the implications of disclosure, the formal confirmation by heads of state of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. He has lectured around the world on the political implications of U.A.P. and ET phenomena and given over 1,200 radio and television interviews. PRG's advocacy work has been extensively covered by national and international media, including being featured on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and in the Washington Post and New York Times. In 2013, PRG organized and conducted a citizen hearing on disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington. In November 2014, PRG launched a 2-year political initiative out of Washington that injected the ET issue into the 2016 presidential campaign. PRG recently launched a new exopolitical podcast out of DC, The Disclosure Wire, based in the National Press Building 2 blocks from the White House. Bassett has appeared in many documentary films, and his lectures and interviews are well represented on YouTube. You can find him on his main website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, and his podcast at disclosurewire.org. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Happy to be with you.
Now, I know the answer to the first question involves Mazda RX-7 and a very important person named John Mack. How'd you become the first activist on the extraterrestrial issue?
I wouldn't say I was the first activist. There have been people who have tried to address the political problem going back all the way to the early 40s. I was the first person to register as a lobbyist on the issue, primarily in order to make the case that an issue of this importance should have a lobbyist.
Right.
Would be nice if it had been a paid lobbyist, but that wasn't an option. But I started. I entered the issue by volunteering to work for John Mack, and who had an organization in Cambridge, Massachusetts called the Program for Extraordinary Experience Research. He was working with contactees directly. He was a Harvard-trained psychologist. He had been encouraged to do this by a number of people, including Bud Hopkins, and he took the considerable risk of doing just that. And he, as part of a large organization, he created this other project called Peer. And I learned about it when I read his book, Abduction, which probably is the single, if there's one book that ensured that I would end up going here, it was that book, Abduction. And his address and phone number for the organization were in the back. And I just felt, hey, this is, I think, where I want to go. And I called them up and was able to persuade them to let me volunteer. I was in California at the time. So I had to pack everything up, got rid of most everything else, and drove across country. And I arrived in Cambridge on January the 26th of 1996, after one of the worst blizzards I'd ever had. The snow was piled up, huge. Where they were clearing, it might be up 10, 12, 15 feet. I had left San Luis Obispo, one of the nicest cities in all of the United States, and I was perfectly happy. I was just thrilled to be there, and I spent 4 months there. It was while I was there that I figured out what my place was, what my role was. It was the political issue. I knew Washington. I'd lived in and out of it for many years. And I was kind of an activist at heart, though I really didn't follow my heart. Should have, probably a lot sooner. So I came down to Washington area. I had a place to stay. I set up, registered as a lobbyist, and eventually set up a website and went from there. And the lobbying registration was key, not simply because I wanted to make a statement, but because I knew that all of those registrations were carefully monitored by the major papers, like the Washington Post, of course. and that they would probably find that one interesting, and they did. And they sent a reporter. They interviewed me and put up a very substantial story in the Washington Post, front page business section, and that is what gave me enough cred to proceed. And it's now 25 years later.
Yeah, that's a great story. I sometimes wonder where we would be if John Mack were still alive. What do you think? What kind of developments maybe could have been made if he were still here along the whole way?
I don't know if it would have changed the disclosure timeline, capital D disclosure timeline, confirmation, but it would have been a good thing for contactees. He would have written probably another book or two, though they say he was getting a little weary of it. He wrote 2, Abduction and then Passports to the Cosmos. But he would have continued to lead or provide gravitas to the field. And that would have been a good thing. Mostly, I just wish he'd stayed around to be able to see what was coming. He'd be about, what would he be? He would be maybe late 80s right now, I think. But he was in great shape. Whatever. It was just an accident, terrible accident in the UK.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So now it's public knowledge now and supported by the mainstream that UFOs are real. Because of the unimaginable size of the universe and the infinite nature of space, I believe it is mathematically certain to follow that not only are ETs real, but they are presently visiting and engaging humanity. Can you talk about some of the work you did similar to the Drake equation and how it's not just UFOs, but also ETs?
It's, well, first, there's a large mass of evidence that shows that ETs are here. It's overwhelming. It's that simple. If someone wants to take the time to go through it all, they should arrive at that conclusion. If they don't, that's fine. As far as ET or UFOs being real, that is I'm not sure what to say that is. It's a non sequitur in a way. It's a built-in absurdity, but it's the kind of language that the truth embargo enjoyed. When you're trying to convince people to act against their interest or support authority or whatever, one of the key things is language. The kind of language you use and get them to use can very much determine how successful you are in getting what you want. I'm talking about government now. And there's many problems with the language, which has been part of my role to help try to fix. UFOs are real is ridiculous. Of course, why? Well, people are seeing things in the sky. You're seeing things in the sky, they're real. You don't see unreal things. You see clouds. Would anybody say, oh, I saw a cloud? Is it real? No, you saw something which, if you put a little effort into it, you can identify as a cloud. So a UFO or real is actually a bogus statement which leads nowhere and was very helpful to the truth embargo. Now, what that phrase is supposed to say and what it was always intended to or it actually means, whether one gets it or not, is UFOs are extraterrestrial in origin, which is obviously a lot more than just being real. Right? So the issue is some of the phenomena. The issue is some of the phenomena of non-human origin. The answer is absolutely 100% certain. Those that want to doubt it are welcome to do that, along with the flat earthers who doubt the world is round. Have fun, enjoy yourself. So, and I knew that when I was a kid. It's not that difficult to figure out. When I was younger, teenager, when I was would read occasional articles about the issue, and there were many. There's always been plenty of media coverage. It just doesn't. They don't investigate it. I concluded quite quickly, well, there's only one explanation for these reports, and that is extraterrestrial technology. So, fine. Wasn't hard at all. Very easy. I didn't actually decide to do anything about that or get involved for 25 years later, but it wasn't hard. So you might say, well, then why isn't it self-evident to everybody? Because the United States government spent a fortune and used all of the technology at its disposal, as well as every aspect of the intelligence construct, which is built the biggest in human history, to put out propaganda, information, and take certain actions to undermine the issue because they did not want it accepted by the public. It's that simple. And they succeeded. It wasn't a sure thing. In fact, I still marvel that 75 years after Roswell, no president has ever finally come forward and said, look, the extraterrestrials are real, are here, right? This is ET technology. So one of the things that needs to be better understood, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn off my email. You don't need to hear that stuff.
Okay.
One of the things that needs to be understood is the truth embargo itself. And this policy of refusing to confirm, which I came to call the truth embargo, people will sometimes call it the UFO cover-up. Well, it's not about UFOs, and it's not a cover-up. It was a legal policy. There are a lot of legal policies under national security aegis that people don't like. I understand that, but it was legal, and therefore it's not a cover-up. It's national security policy using secrecy and other diversions. So, but still, that it succeeded is remarkable. It's an extraordinary accomplishment, which means that they really worked at it. Enormous effort and untold amounts of money were spent to maintain a non-committal, if not a negative posture on the part of the military intelligence complex and the political class on this issue. 75 years. And 75 years in, this is an important statement, we know more about the U.A.P. presence, or the U.A.Ps, the phenomena. We know more about the ETs that built these craft than we know about the truth embargo that has kept it from us, or kept the truth from us, the last 75 years. The truth embargo has been completely sub rosa, odd document here and there. We don't know the people involved, except at the very earliest days. We really don't know the history of how they pulled it off. And that's one of the areas that I'm focusing on. It's one of the areas I'm most interested in, not simply because I coined the phrase truth embargo, but because from a standpoint of how all of this has affected people in their lives, their relationship to their government itself. In other words, the social contract, the body politic, and all that. I can make a very good case that the truth embargo, the government policy of embargo, has affected us more, and certainly done more damage than the extraterrestrial presence. Think about that for a second. So anyway, that's my area. I'm an exopolitical activist, and I'm also an anti-war activist, disguised as an exopolitical activist. It's just a thing that I like to mention once in a while.
Yeah, I love that about you. And I do think the ET issue is something that can lead to the end of war. But
lead to a lot of things.
Oh yeah. So you're talking about definitions and vocabulary there a little bit. Can you define the word paradigm?
Paradigm, obviously, I'm paraphrasing here. Paradigm became a word well known because of a book by, oh Lord, I'm having a memory hole here. It was a gentleman, it talked about paradigm shifts and so forth. And the name of the book escapes me, and that's terrible, but I'm getting old. What can I say?
That's all right.
A paradigm refers to a well-defined standard of understanding, meaning there is a very strong collective understanding about something. It could be an area of physics, or particularly a large area of physics. It could be a fundamental religious basis of interpreting the world. It could be a number of things, but it's the understanding, and it's got to be broad consensus. And it has to be important. In other words, it's not some trivial thing. So what, and boy, I wish I could remember this gentleman's name. What this gentleman wrote about was how these paradigms can shift, how paradigms can shift. So this understanding, let's consider one of the most famous paradigm shifts of the last 125 years. And that was the paradigm shift from Newtonian physics to relativistic physics. Einstein didn't just come up with another law or a little new information about the physical world. He came up with a new interpretation of the physical world that was so different from Newtonian physics that it was literally a paradigm shift in physics. So that is one that is quite well known, and there are others. Now, I happen to believe that the transition from a world in which there is no consensus and no authoritative support for the presence of extraterrestrials to a world where there is full confirmation of extraterrestrial presence by governments and a massive consensus supporting that is the biggest paradigm shift in human history. It will be the biggest paradigm shift in human history. It is a worldview change, staggering in its scope, implications, and so forth. Some would disagree. That's fine. It's okay. I feel pretty good about it. So, not surprisingly, I use paradigm in the name of the organization I set up 25 years ago, Paradigm Research Group, which isn't a research group. I mean, it isn't about research. Yeah, what can I say? I apologize for that. But I set it up when I registered as a lobbyist, and I used that name for a while, and then I shifted to my name and then back to Paradigm. Point is, I use that name because I went to some groups engaging the issue and said, would you like someone to register as a lobbyist for you? I'm not charging anything. It's a freebie. And they said, sure. I had no idea what I could do or not do. I knew I didn't have any money. I knew the issue was under enormous ridicule. And a lot of people have said whether you're crazy to even bother. But I had a plan. And so I registered a number of organizations under my lobbying registration, and thus Paradigm. And these organizations are by and large all about research in the field. So Paradigm Research Group.
Yeah, I think another example could be like from going to horse and buggy to the automobile or straight to the airplane. But even that will be dwarfed by the disclosure event.
Oh God, not even close. But yeah, the arrival of the piston engine and its incorporation in transportation was an absolute paradigm shift in transportation. Absolutely. So that engine had plenty of other uses than just moving things around. That was a paradigm shift, a significant one.
So the next term I'd like you to define is exopolitics.
Exopolitics emerged around 2000, and it's simply say in political science, exopolitical science would be the subset of political science, which focuses essentially primarily on the political implications of all things extraterrestrial, which would include the government's engagement of the issue or lack thereof, as well as any other impact that phenomena has had on politics. Now, this will become a very big field of study, I assure you, particularly when we have open contact with extraterrestrials. Then the political implications exponentially expand. But even now, there's all kinds of political implications to the phenomena, to the engagement of the phenomena by the public, the way the government has handled it, and so forth. All of that would come under exopolitical science. And in due course, every single political science department in the country will either teach or have a full department of exopolitical science, which will deal with exopolitics.
So the last vocabulary situation to even out, a lot of people, they naively think that disclosure has already occurred. I see more and more people saying it's only a slow process. And what they fail to realize is that there still is a threshold or a line that must be crossed historically, and nothing before this happens will compare to that moment. You often call this the red line of disclosure. Can you explain
Well,
what that line is and the difference between lowercase d and uppercase d disclosure?
yeah. First of all, I don't think someone's naive for thinking disclosure has already happened. It just depends on how you define it. A disclosure in the standard use of disclosure in the English language, it's a term that goes back quite a ways, is a revealing of information. Or, yeah, pretty much it's usually information, though it could be the revealing of some other things, not necessarily information as we know it, but it's a basic term, a revealing of information. Now, doesn't matter what that information is. If someone doesn't know it and then you reveal it to them, you have disclosed it. So the entire research, and with respect to the U.A.P. issue, the entire research effort by the public and whatever the research the government's been doing, which is quite a bit, is a process of trying to understand this issue, to gather information. And to the extent that any of that information is revealed within government to other parts of government, that's an act of small d disclosure. To the extent that any information is revealed to the public from the research in the public sector, that is an act of disclosure. They're revealing new information. They're disclosing. I studied this. I've known this. I'm telling you now. That's disclosure, small d. It's been going on intensely for 75 years, inside the government, outside the government. Thousands of books, hundreds of documentaries, endless accountings of sightings and journals and magazines and so forth. It's just a mass of, quote, small d disclosure. But that's not the disclosure that I'm involved in. The political activist movement is about getting things done. In fact, all activism, with very few exceptions, is about getting organizations of authority, which sometimes could be a single person, but it's usually always an organization of authority, a government, a state government, local government, a corporation, institution, to do something it doesn't want to do. Almost, if you can, I struggle to find an example, right? Or to be fair, to stop doing, or to stop doing something it's doing, or do something it's not doing, but in either case, you're wanting them to do something that it doesn't want to do. That is all that activism is, almost in every case, in terms as we use it and define it. So the activist movement, which started to formalize in the late 1990s and then get underway in the 2000s, of which I was a significant part of, is simply about getting the government to do something it doesn't want to do. And what is that? To reveal to the American people the confirmation, the information that confirms that the ET presence is here. And there are a lot of ways to do that, but there's only one that makes sense and one that's appropriate, and that is that the head of state makes the announcement. You could send out a bunch of emails to people. The government could suddenly just send out 200 million emails with a little thing in there with a heading that says ETs are here. That would be a revealing of that, but that's obviously not the way you want it done. So disclosure is the revealing of the ET presence by authority, and it is essentially the confirmation of that presence, and that confirmation should and only should come from the President of the United States. So disclosure with a capital D is defined by me, which makes it simple for me to defend it because I defined it. And so, hey, it is what I say it is, right? If you don't like it, that's fine. Define it some other way. It is the formal confirmation of an extraterrestrial, by a formal confirmation by heads of state of nations of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. Now, that's it. Nothing else is capital D disclosure because it's a specific event. Now, after that capital D disclosure confirmation event takes place, you will then enter what I refer to as the post-disclosure world, where the amount of information being revealed, the amount of small d disclosure, I suspect, will escalate rather rapidly. And so again, the disclosure that I talk about and that we're pressing the government to execute is a capital D event in which the president confirms the ET presence. That is what it is and nothing else. It's not other information. It's not what follows. It's not what the Congress Bentley says. No, it's about that confirmation from the president or, and I've said this countless times, the head of state of another nation, such as Russia or China. There are a reasonable number of nations who are sufficiently well established and substantial that if their head of state were to make that confirmation to their people on camera, to the world, that would do it. And the rest of the heads of state would have to follow. They would have no choice. They could not simply say, well, we don't really, we don't think so. We're going to hold out. No. The whole thing will just literally explode out. And so the only question is which head of state, for me, one of the fundamental questions, which head of state is going to be first?
Yeah, I know you went to Russia recently. We're going to get into that later in the podcast, but.
And I came back. How about that?
Right. Yeah, you made it back in one piece. I recently had the ecologist Guy McPherson on, and he talked about humans having only a few to several years left before our habitats can't support us anymore. Why is it so imperative that disclosure happens as soon as possible?
With all due respect to McPherson, if that's what he said, I need to know what he means by a few years. I think we are facing some ecological challenges without question. Changes that are taking place on the planet that have happened before. This is not new. What is new is the current change taking place is being accelerated by the human presence. To a degree, no other animal has ever probably impacted the overall processes on the earth. And if certain measures are not taken in time, in this century, we're going to face serious consequences. It's also the case that we are pressing habitat, pressing environmental status, species are dying off and what have you. But I think it's much too strong to say in a few years, the human habitat is going to be destroyed. No, it's not going to be destroyed. It might get a little more uncomfortable. But, and this is something I will be talking about a lot. And so this is good practice. We have a serious problem that humanity faces right now. Well, there are many problems, but here is one that is particularly serious. And that, I'll put it this way. The biggest threat to humanity, number one, the other threats are a distant second, third, fourth, fifth. It was just like Secretariat winning, what was the last one, the Preakness, won by what, 38 lengths or something like that. It's like this. The biggest threat to humanity is not viruses. It's not global warming. It is nuclear weapons and the use thereof, nuclear war. Absolutely the biggest threat. And the situation with respect to nuclear weapons and the risk of nuclear war, it's not only not over, it is escalating to the point where it is more dangerous now than it was at the end of World War, well, in the 50s or 60s, even the Cuban Missile Crisis. We could have nuclear war at any moment, tomorrow. And so, I mean, no disrespect to climate scientists, but all of this massive debate and effort and agony and headaches and screaming and yelling about global warming and all of the demands that we have to make enormous changes in our systems and what have you, make sacrifices so that we can somehow head off the consequences of global warming. They are not without logic, and they're not without some merit, but there's a real problem here. Long before global warming has flooded much of Florida or destroyed Louisiana with 6 consecutive hurricanes, long before that happens, because that is still many years down the line, we are going to turn this planet into a nuclear waste dump. We are going to have a nuclear war. Period. I'm not sure we can make it 10 years. I really doubt we can make it 20 years. No chance in hell we make it to 2050. Unless there is dramatic change. Now, when I say a nuclear war is inevitable, I am making that statement on the basis that we do not address this issue in a broad, profound way. And obviously, if you've been paying attention to the news, it's all global warming. Nukes don't even barely come up. It's not being addressed. The politicians are not talking about it. They're not campaigning on it. They're not addressing laws on it. I don't know if there's even a nuclear arms limitation discussion anywhere. All you hear is new news about new, more powerful, more invulnerable nukes. Meanwhile, geopolitical circumstances are declining, eroding. It is absolute madness, which is, of course, is why the nuclear weapons led to the greatest acronym of all time, mutual assured destruction. This was a phrase which has the profound acronym of MAD that was used to sort of try to let people know, don't get too upset, go to your job, do your work, raise your kid, and pay your taxes. Even though the people inside knew we could have a nuclear war like that. Mutual assured destruction. Nobody would launch a nuclear weapon because if they did, they would be destroyed too. And so this mutual assured destruction thing means there will not be a nuclear war. Guess what? We've almost had nuclear launches leading to war on a number of occasions. Anyone does their research, they could probably find 2 or 3, but there's several others that have not really been disclosed yet, but our government will one day probably tell us about them. We're lucky to be here. It's a damn miracle that we made it here. We should have had that nuclear war and turned the world into a place where the living envy the dead. So global warming, please. Let's take all that money that we're prepared to spend, take all that political capital, and let's focus on addressing the nuclear threat worldwide, every country. Let's hold summit after summit after summit. Let's get it in front of the UN every single day. Let us deal with the nuclear threat, because if we do not, global warming will be moot. Destructive habitat, moot. Loss of species, moot. Hell, the moon could crash into the earth. It won't make much difference. This is a truth which has simply disappeared from the landscape. Even across the broad spectrum of news we have now, from the deep left to the far right, everything in the middle, you can barely find it. This is madness. This is insanity. In other words, we've normalized it to the point where, hey, you know, I'm going to get upset about this and that and global warming and everything else, but in terms of the nuke thing, what can you do? Why not say that about global warming? What can you do? No, we're not doing that. And other things that we're concerned about, world hunger, out fishing out the seas and all that's all fine. Nukes, what can you do? This is crazy. Hey, and I guess I'm sort of glad that it's this crazy, because it gives me something to really pound. It is a nail, and I am going to pound that nail with a sledgehammer right through the board, through the floor, because we absolutely have got to shift to this, and we've got to do it soon, or we're finished. Not 20 years from now, not 30 years from now, next week, pick a day, it could happen at any moment. This is what the message I'm trying to get out. Okay, so I appreciate your previous guest concerns. I've now raised another concern, and let's see how that goes. Let's see who takes that up. Now, there's more to say about that with respect to the ETs, but I'm going to I'm going to stop now and let you have some more questions, but I assure you, I'm going to double back on that.
Oh yeah, we'll be getting back to the whole Robert Salas testimony and all that too.
Right.
But yeah, there are massive changes on the horizon for our species. Just those things you were talking about there. I wanted to ask you, why is it untrue that people won't be able to handle the truth and that mass chaos will ensue if they learn ET is already here?
Well, this is one of those things you can't prove, because until it happens, you don't know. One just has to use the powers of their logic and common sense and whatever, and what they know about history to come up with a projection. I know that the US government has already projected this. They've been game playing this probably since the early aughts, if not sooner. I have some information on that. You don't think the Department of Defense hasn't gamed out what would happen if disclosure took place? Of course they have. Many times. They've looked at it from every possible angle. What they think about that, of course, we don't know, because they can't tell us. If they were to tell us they're gaming out what would happen in post-disclosure world, that would be kind of a hint that there's ETs here. And of course, the policy is ETs? ETs? What ETs? I don't see them. You see them? So, look, I believe that 90% of all of the concern that's been manifested since the earliest days regarding how people would react to the presence of ETs is pure, unmitigated propaganda. Absolutely propaganda, designed to keep things quiet, keep things under control. So when the Brookings report back in '60 said, happened to mention that it could undermine religion and this and that, be a real big problem, that a lot of people thought that was a message to the public, sort of a disclosure to the public. Hey, if this were really to happen, it would be really bad. It wasn't a message to the public. That report wouldn't have been seen by anybody if it wasn't for the U.A.P. researchers. That was a message to the people who work in government, because that was the real problem then, back in '60. It wasn't so much the public, it was people in government. In other words, you've got all these military officers and pilots and naval officers, radar operators, and God knows who else, that in the course of their work became aware that there's an ET presence. And others may not have had direct contact with the work, but figured it out on their own, or were tipped off by others, what have you. But has always been a substantial group of people within our government, military intelligence complex, that has known there's an ET presence. But they were not prepared to publicly say that. However, some could. The government was always fearful that some top witnesses might come forward, people that could reveal information, walk out the door like Snowden did, and hand it all to the press. This was a little less likely back then, but still they were worried about it. And so I believe all the scare tactics about collapse of civilization and people running around naked and in the middle of the street was essentially to tell people inside, look, if you're thinking about violating an agreement or a non-disclosure, or if you don't have a non-disclosure, but you came into control of some documents, don't go down to the New York Times. Don't go to NBC. Don't try to be a hero. You don't understand. If you did that and it actually exposed this thing and the ET presence was confirmed, the world will go crazy. The churches will collapse. The economy will go to hell. There'll be nothing on the shelves. We'll all starve to death, whatever. It was to just help keep the people in government contained by feeding them propaganda. Now, this is also turned up in the public domain as well. It is another convenient way to scare people away. Just don't bother it, right? You don't get involved. Don't do research. Don't be an activist, because maybe it's true and it'll come out and then everything will collapse. It's bullshit. The people are going to handle it very, very well. If you look at what the human race has dealt with over the last 10,000 years, every manner of destruction, plague, war, genocides, horrendous acts, economic collapse, you name it. And we're here. So the idea, and of course, after since 1950, after 70 years of one ET based movie after another, hundreds and hundreds of films with extraterrestrials in them, mostly bad ETs, but some good ETs, and now CGI films taking us out in the galaxy, flying us around in warp drive. I mean, it's just one of the stupidest things any person in authority could say. We don't think there's ETs here, but if there were, we wouldn't tell you because everything would fall apart. It's just ignorance at a level that is hard to comprehend.
Yeah, it's almost as if we're over prepared at this point and it's overdue and it's something that's late.
Oh yeah, over prepared, overdue, over anxious, right? You bet. This lie should have ended a long time ago, and this policy should have ended a long time ago. So, but it's not unusual for the governments to maintain policies for hundreds of years in the face of complete contradictions, while it does tremendous damage. I expect more from the United States and other countries, particularly the UK and others. I expect more. But on the other hand, I do sort of understand how it ended up being this long. And the reasons were not as heinous as other instances where governments have literally misled the public for 100 years, 100, 200 years, or held policies or conducted policies were damaging for a huge length of time. It's not the worst case of that. However, because of all of the other circumstances that are happening, it's the most profound case of this, and now is the most it's now essential to the greatest degree that a policy like this ends as soon as possible.
Absolutely. So there are some other serious issues that the ET issue reveals. Can you talk about the constitutional crisis that's exposed by the ET issue and why people in government who are supposed to have access to the info, they aren't being read in?
A lie is very much like cancer. It can be small with a very minor impact, local, and just goes away on its own, or it can be easily fixed by a simple truth. But lies can also get big, multiply, and become metastatic to the point where it can destroy a relationship, it can drive a person to suicide, and it can bring down an entire nation. So the truth embargo, in its simplest interpretation, is a grand lie that the government has maintained for 75 years. Now, there are many, 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 many other smaller lies that have had to accompany it in order to maintain the grand lie. So it's not just a single lie, it's a lot of lies. And as a result, it has been literally metastatic to the nation. From the day that they grabbed Mac Brazel off the street in Roswell, New Mexico, and took him into confined him for 10 days, pounding him to convince him to change his story so they could get out from under the rather awkward press release that had been sent out by the Roswell Army Air Force Base. This lie has been eating away at trust. Because, first of all, there was a number of people that knew no later than Roswell, July 47, that in fact ETs were here. It wasn't a big number. And so when they changed the story, a number of people at that point realized the government's lying, but for national security reasons. Over time, the number of people that began to figure out the ET presence was in fact true, grew and grew and grew, and is still growing, but the lie remained. And so what you had is an ever escalating situation where millions and millions and millions more people understood that the government was lying to them about probably the most important issue in the world, and not just a lie, it is something that they have to do every day. In other words, it's not like somebody told a lie and then you go about your life and then one day you have to deal with it. No. This lie had to be repeated in one way or another every day, and has been repeated every day since 1947. And it is metastasized. Not only has it undermined trust of the public, along with many other things, right? The government's done a lot of things that undermine trust. A lot of these, though, have been of a singular nature. In other words, they lie about the circumstances that ultimately lead to a war. Okay, they made a lie, a war happened, terrible things happened, and then we learn about it later. Okay. The ET issue is not a singular lie. It is a daily 24/7 situation. In other words, they're lying. They have to every day. And so the power of it is greater. And so you have more and more people knowing that the government's lying. Now, let me talk about lying for a second. It's a simple thing. But for those of you who are in a relationship with a significant other, particularly those of you who've been in one for a while, you probably know that you have at one time or another lied to your significant other. And perhaps your significant other has lied to you. And you know that that can be a problem. If in fact it's a singular lie, it's not a big one, and you just move on, it's not a problem. If it's a big lie, but again, you're able to manage it, doesn't come out, you move on. It may bother you. You could have some guilt issues that could affect your relationship, but overall, you're okay. But many, many magnitudes worse than that is this. When one person in a relationship is lying to the other person daily, in other words, having to maintain a lie of significance with the other person over a long period of time, and the other person knows they're lying, that just eats a relationship from the inside out and blows it up. It's one thing to be lied to. It's another to be lied to and know you're being lied to. Now, oftentimes what happens in a relationship is the one lies to the other sits on it for 24 hours and comes back and says, I knew you were lying. And the other person starts apologizing profusely and buying gifts or whatever the hell they got to do. And maybe they save the relationship. The American people, an ever-growing number, have known the government's lying about this. They know they're lying. The government keeps lying. And so this just eats at trust. It undermines trust. And we have been seeing it happen. The last 40 years in particular, we have been seeing the trust of the American people in government just evaporate like the Dead Sea. Nothing good is going to come from that. Now, it gets worse because that distrust, the distrust in the government on the issue of the ET is spreading to other subjects. Once you decide that the government lies to you, then what is the limit to what the government will lie about? The default position is everything. What happens when more and more people start going there? And then you've got other countries that know you're lying. And that means that, well, and we think you're a good country, but man, you've been lying about this for 5 decades. What else are you lying about? Can we really trust you? And on and on and on and on. In other words, we didn't just arrive at the situation we're in today. And I'm not going to get into length about it. People, it's hard not to know what's going on easily. Our government had to work extremely hard to develop the levels of trust they now have, which is bottomed. So the social contract, in addition to the fact that the nation could be turned into a nuclear waste dump at any time, the social contract is being eaten alive. Things are breaking down and so forth. It's a damn mess. Okay. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we have to decide if we're going to change that paradigm and how to do it. how do you go from an extraordinary low level of trust in government to the point where people cannot come together and agree on anything, will not take reasonably appropriate actions to even save their own life because they believe the government is inveterate lying, is an inveterate liar? How do you get from somewhere else? There's only one way. There is no other way. There is only one option. Now, let me give another simple analogy. You're a parent, you've got a son. Your son's 12, coming into those difficult years. And your son starts lying to you about a lot of things. And you start to see that. And maybe you bring it up. And he says, whatever. But keeps lying. This goes on for years until you've reached the point where you cannot trust your son at all. Whatever he says, you simply can't trust it. You know that he's lying. You've been unable to address it. And so the relationship with your son is essentially broken, and it's awful, and you feel awful. It's a terrible situation. Believe me, it happens a lot. And so someone would say, well, you need to regain trust in your son. And okay, how does that happen? Give me 5 possibilities. There's only one possibility. If anybody's got another one, I'd love to hear it. The only way that you're going to be able to gain trust in your son is if your son starts telling you the truth. And you know that. And he tells you another, and another, and another. And given the opportunity to lie, chooses not to. Only telling the truth can possibly repair that relationship. There is nothing else that will do it. I know people are like, what are you going to do? Right? Now, governments, of course, have a lot more resources than, say, a son, a 12-year-old boy. Our government made a fateful choice during the past 40, 50 years. We'll start at Vietnam. We'll start with basically, I like to go back to the lie about the Gulf of Tonkin, which helped us get into the Vietnam War and escalate it, thus resulting in one of the most catastrophic acts the government of the U.S. will ever undergo. So it takes us back to the early 60s. As things began to deteriorate, as the Pentagon Papers come out, and this comes out, and that comes out, and the lying of government becomes more evident and obvious, and people get more angry about it, a fateful decision was made, I think, by the general political class. Is this: we're lying all the time, and the public has figured it out. It's causing enormous problems. We have got to bear down and figure out how to lie better. If we could lie better, then they would think we're telling the truth, and then things might improve. They literally made that decision, and it didn't work. In fact, things just deteriorated even further, to the point where we have people storming the Capitol to try to kill members of Congress, hang them, or put bear spray in their mouth, or whatever the hell. This is the great American experiment, 250 years on. This is what it's come to. So, under my theory, the only way the trust in government is going to be restored is if the United States government starts telling the truth to the American people. Period. 0 lies, nothing but truth. Okay, yep. Fine, okay. But let's say the government told the truth tomorrow. People are not going to believe it. So it's going to take something dramatic, something so powerful, so implicative that people would have to sit up and go, whoa, let's confirm that. Oh, that's a big deal. Let's look at that. What do you got? And then they confirm it and go, wow, you told us the truth. Thank you. Appreciate it. In other words, it's got to be a big ass truth. All right. Well, there is one truth bigger than any other truth in this world today, and that is that there is an extraterrestrial presence. And so the day that the President of the United States, following many days of hearings in the Congress, many hearings, many witnesses, is able to go in front of the public in the East Room of the White House and say, look, I'm now convinced there's an extraterrestrial presence, and tells us that truth, and then backs it up with even more information. And then the military intelligence complex starts revealing, disclosing new information about it all as it slowly unravels a little bit. American people will say, truth, 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 truth. Okay, good. Keep it up. I'm starting to believe you again. And then before you know, it starts to spread to other areas, other agencies, might even spread to the politicians that sit in the House of, sit in the Congress. Truth, 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 truth. This sounds like a fairy tale. I know. People laugh. Are you kidding? Well, let me tell you, you can laugh all you want. But unless that fairy tale comes true, we're not going to have much of a government. We're not going to have much of a country. And I should also add that the deterioration of the American system, the deterioration of American institutions, and the disruption it is causing is just another thing that is making the prospects of nuclear war more inevitable. It all ties together. You just can't untie things at this level. They're all interlocked. And so we either get it wrapped up, get it done, or it's over. That's how important the disclosure event is. That's how important ending this lie is. There is nothing more important in this world than that. And there's some very important things out there. So the job of the activist and everybody else that's dealing with this issue right now, at one level can be basically boiled down to this: convince as many people as possible that indeed this is the most important issue in the world, and its resolution is the most important paradigm shift ever, and we must have it as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's as if they back themselves into a corner and they're going to have to address it. It's inevitable.
Oh, they're in a corner for sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the secrecy on this issue. I've often heard you use the term, I think, secret empire. And a lot of people have theories about extra governmental entities, secret societies, hidden organizations, or private companies managing the issue. From your perspective as an activist, how does the secrecy and unacknowledgement work on the ET issue?
Well, I used the term secret empire in the early years to put emphasis on the fact that the military intelligence complex has a secrecy problem. In other words, it's out of control. And that is going to not work out well. And also to emphasize that the military intelligence complex started removing things out from the congressional and executive oversight, which violates the Constitution. So it is a constitutional violation, a constitutional breach, I call it. And so you got, to some degree, you got this secret world operating on its own. It's kind of like its own world. It's huge. So I called it a secret empire. Don't use that as much anymore because the word secret now gets us into a lot of other areas that I don't think are relevant. But the abuses of power and secrecy by the military intelligence complex has been a key component of undermining confidence as well as trust in government. And everybody looks at it from their own perspective. They see different things. What one person considers nefarious, another person considers to be probably reasonable policy. But the distrust in these institutions now is huge, and new terms are turning up to describe it. The current one in vogue is deep state. What that means, I have no idea. Specifically means, but in general, what it is referring to, and other phrases like that, is there is a very classified world that is huge and is abusing power and secrecy. And they have 1,000 theories about what that world is doing. Unfortunately for all the theorists, because of the secrecy, we don't really fully know. We just get glimpses and pieces of the puzzle, but occasionally an important book gets written, it goes deep. But by and large, the public in the United States, their fundamental situation is this: they don't really know what the hell's going on in a significant portion of our government, and they're paranoid about it. They're worried about it. They know of abuses, they know about lying, and they also know there's a tremendous amount that's never been revealed at all. It's like the House of State has got a basement with 120 levels, and the door to the basement is locked. And you don't know what's going on down there, but occasionally odors come up from down there and they stink up the house, and you hear noises in the middle of the night. It's not conducive to comfortable citizenship. So that's another way to look at it. So that's what I meant by secret empire. In terms of secrecy, look, there are plenty of books on secrecy. Well, not plenty, but there are a decent number of books on secrecy and secrecy reform. None have had any impact at all, pretty much on policy. But we have some ideas of how the classification systems work, the stovepiping, the isolation of the one groups from others, and then keeping documents and records sealed, and all of this. I mean, there's just the intelligence complex. The military intelligence complex of the United States is bigger than the Roman Empire. All right, so it's huge. And are we overseeing it properly? No. Are we managing it? Not really. Is it could be a source of huge problems in the future? Absolutely. Are politicians really focused on it? No. Is the media really focused on it? Not really. Occasionally a story will turn up and they'll seize and go, oh, I got something. But in terms of really, no. It's too much. It's just too much. I don't have the money. The military intelligence complex in the secret empire is funded by untold billions of dollars. Any one of those departments could buy and sell the Washington Post several times over. So it's tough. I don't have any easy answers to all of that, except that a paradigm shift in worldview and a major event like disclosure has the potential to unlock many, many, many doors that are previously locked, and we can go through those doors. Journalists and others can go through those doors and start sorting things out. Right now, those doors are locked, and they're going to stay locked until disclosure takes place. There's nothing else that can open those doors with that. Not some hotshot activist, not some newspaper with a burning desire to win Pulitzer Prizes. No, these doors are really locked. Disclosure could unlock them, but that's just the biggest event in human history.
Yeah, it's gotten so out of control. You really do. You need something otherworldly to resolve that. So
I guess you could say otherworldly,
yeah. So I wanted to briefly talk about some of the people in our community who have passed away. They've really put it all on the line, committed their lives to the issue, and weren't able to live to see disclosure happen. I wanted to focus on two of them who are instrumental in this. Can you talk about your relationship with Stanton Friedman and his contribution to the field?
I should advise your listeners that, or viewers, that paradigmresearchgroup.org under projects, and I think it's projects, and there's main, and there's others. Under other projects, you'll find an in memoriam page where I'm doing my best to recognize and provide some information about the people in the field that have gotten known who have passed away, going all the way back to 1940s. And that's the natural process. But as we get close to the present, the deaths start to become more painful for me because, again, we're involved in one of the greatest events in human history, the paradigm shift of unimaginable significance. And these people worked their whole life, many decades in many cases. It would be nice to be able to see disclosure happen. That's not too much to ask. But of course, every major activist movement of any consequence has ever happened. Believe me, a lot of the people that started it or served it did not get to see the prize. And that's just the way it is. Stanton is one example. Now he's been dead for a while. I did not have a personal relationship with him, I certainly met him and talked with him on occasions. He came to my X conferences and other events that I held. He just I called him the Rock. I used to call him the Rock of the U.A.P. research. Notice I'm avoiding the word ufology. I despise that term with a hot passion because he was solid. He just never deviated from this fundamental analysis research. To his great credit, he, after pretty much covering everything that he wanted to cover in hardware, he got into the contact area and wrote about that with Kathleen Martin and basically lent his gravitas to the fact that the contact phenomenon is real, which is a pretty significant issue, pretty significant political issue, I should also say. And I liked him. He's a good man. And he retired. I remember one incident. I went to one of the MUFON. I've been to a number of the MUFON festivals that are held every July. Spoke at a number of them. I think the first one I went to in '97, I didn't speak. And a number of years ago, I went to one, and Stan was supposed to speak, but he didn't get there. He came there late, and we come to find out that he lives out in the boondocks in Halifax, I think. So he has to drive a good ways to get to an airport to fly down here, and he's tired, and he falls asleep at the wheel, and his car just drives off the road and turns over. Now, I think it is a pretty flat area with a small embankment, so he just kind of over and flipped over, and he wasn't hurt. Well, and apparently he called the tow trucks or whatever to come out and take care of the car, and got a cab and went on and flew down to Roswell and gave his presentation. A few years after that, well, a number of years after that, he says, I'm retired. I'm done. I mean, I don't want to speak anymore. I'm just going to kind of retire and just take it easy. Well, that didn't last long. I think he cut back, but he was presenting. He was giving lectures, and he's on his way back from another lecture and has a heart attack right in the airport. I forget which airport. Might have been New York connection, might have been up in Canada. I don't know, but
I think it was actually right where I live, right above where I live in Ohio, if I recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And it had to be a severe heart attack because all airports have got everything. They've got all the necessary equipment. And the moment somebody goes down, they do an emergency call out, and there's people there immediately with defibrillators and so forth. So he didn't survive it. So essentially, he worked up to the very last day of his life. That's Stanton Friedman. He's a legend. I think he will be seen as such. His work will be studied and recognized and acknowledged for a very long time.
Yeah, whenever I have a skeptic bothering me, I just remember to not let the nasty, noisy negativists affect me.
Exactly.
That tends to help.
Let them go on, move on, do your thing.
Right. So the other person that will help segue into the next question, I'm a big fan of his work with the Fluxliner and his documentary Zero Point. What is your opinion on Mark McCandlish and his contribution?
I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. I think this is public information. Engaging this issue is not easy. The risk can vary. I'm not saying we're in a dictatorship, an authoritarian state where anybody that challenges the government ends up in the bottom of a river. That's extremely rare. We have a lot of freedom, and the government's constantly being attacked, and by and large, there aren't consequences. However, occasionally there are. But the worst thing about engaging this issue is the truth embargo. Remember, it's not just that the government acknowledges, yeah, it's true, but we can't tell you anything about it. And so you're working on them, trying to get information. No, it's not like that. The government says there's nothing to it at all. You're nuts. And the ridicule starts and begins and goes on. And as you go back in time, it gets worse and worse. The government literally denies that the issue that you're engaging exists at all. Brutal. That's tough, frustrating. Also, all the ridicule and things like that make it very difficult to get money to do the research unless you're independently wealthy. If you've got a job, you got to be careful because you get in this field, you might lose your job. So people for a lot of people, for many years, it was a hobby. They fund themselves out of their back pocket and what have you. Any witnesses that come forward also can be a problem. So Mark came forward initially in 2001, and I don't know the extent that his coming forward on this issue and being part of Greer's press conference affected him directly. I know that he had work and he was well respected in his field as an illustrator and so forth. But that was 2001. And the years just keep going by and going by and going by, and it's not resolved. And the government keeps lying. And a lot of people don't handle that well. It's very frustrating. It's angering. And Mark is an example of someone whose life just started coming apart. And ultimately, he took his own life. That is what I know. And that's based upon fairly direct information. However, I have to say that there's a possibility that it's been determined otherwise. And I haven't checked, so I'm going to leave that out there. It's very possible that he took his own life. There's a lot of indications of that. He's not the only one that's done that. So I really feel bad about that. But I know other people in the field that are still here, but I know how their life has been affected by all this, and it hasn't been good. So there's that. But look, before I get carried away here, let me be clear that as activism goes, this issue is not that dangerous. As activism goes, this is not awful. People that pursued the civil rights activism, which really got underway when Reconstruction fell apart under Johnson, a really bad human being. And I'm talking about Andrew Johnson, of course, in 1865. So for the next 200 years, you had people fighting for civil rights, paying heavy price, awful, endless, and not getting too far. And then finally the Civil Rights Act was passed, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 64, 65, 200 years. Think about that. Think about all the people that were killed, murdered. So I don't want to get too maudlin about, not maudlin, but I'm going to get too, how would you say, complaining about how tough it is and how people are harmed by doing this work. There have been plenty of activist movements far, far tougher than this one. And we are lucky that we're able to pursue it in a country that has relatively high levels of freedom, which ultimately will be one of the reasons why we will win. This is the United States. We have a constitution. The government is not telling the truth, and we will get disclosure and we will win. I just hope we don't lose anybody else. If disclosure happens in the next 4 or 5 months, which is very possible, we probably won't lose anybody else, and that would be nice.
Yeah, so rest in peace to Mark. Great guy. Really love his testimony. Probably my favorite witness from the Disclosure Project. But I wanted to talk about the technologies. Now, this is something that has bothered me. I feel like over the past few years, there's been a parting of ways with the emphasis on the advanced tech that would come from disclosure, like zero-point energy and the science in the flux liner. And it's popular now for people to deny that this is fact and that these sciences are already known and hidden from public use. Even though they're accepting to UFOs, why do you think people have been distracted from the technological component of disclosure?
I don't know if they're distracted. We have to get disclosure first, and then we learn about this tech. There were years there where the tech was being used to try to get the attention of the media and maybe even politicians, trying to make the case that, wow, the benefits from this tech would be significant and politically that would be a huge benefit for you and what have you. But it didn't affect the truth embargo. However, I've talked about it a lot, and many of my colleagues have talked about it. It's out there. It's well documented on the web. And so when the truth embargo ends, I assure you, the tech issue will come to life. However dormant it seems now, post-disclosure, it'll come to life quite vigorously. It will be a major, major issue. So for your viewers, what are we talking about? And let's just keep it simple, because we don't. The granular aspects of this, we simply don't have access to. But at the simplest basis, it's this. Since 1947, our government has known there's an ET presence, known that there are these craft and that they're not ours. These craft do not use wings and they don't use jet propulsion. They don't leave, they're not even hot. In other words, when you do an infrared on them, it shows that they're cool. We don't have that technology. So what is it? How do they fly? Simple question. And I assure you the government has been addressing that question without let up for 3/4 of a century. They fly anagravitically. So that's the term that I use, and it's common. Anagravitic craft, which simply means they're able to negate gravity in a way that we don't know how to do. That makes them pretty special, given their performance abilities, speeds, turns, and things like that. These are amazing. Like Will Smith said when he was able to finally get in one of those alien craft in Independence Day, I want to fly one of these. But the saucers that we know of are, well, I think in a way, perform even better than the ones in Independence Day. The point is that there's anagravitic craft here, and the government's known it since no later than 47, if not a little bit sooner. So guess what? One thing happened for sure. When scientists, in this case government scientists, see that something is true, something is happening, that makes it far more intense for them to now figure it out. In other words, it's one thing for no anti-gravitic craft anywhere. I mean, it's just a concept in your head and you're thinking, I wonder if it's doable. Can I don't know, should I go there? Should I study that? I don't know. Should I invest money in that? Sometimes you do. You intellectually say, look, this is worth pursuing. But when you have an example of it flying over your head, oh, okay, we're going to figure out how that works. We know it works because it's there. And so the government has been, at minimum, going after the answer to anti-gravitic drive, anti-gravitic propulsion. Except we also know they have crash vehicles. That's been proven. The only thing that we don't know is how many and how many countries. And so I'm going to naively suggest that if the government has several crash vehicles of extraterrestrial origin, they have done everything they can do and spent any amount of money they needed to study that crash vehicle down to its molecules. Now, somebody may say, nah, they wouldn't do that. They just put it in a big warehouse like in Indiana Jones. Please don't insult me. So we've been studying that technology theoretically and possibly, well, not possibly, but also physically for 75 years. I believe we have anti-gravitic craft. I think we have versions of it. I can't say 100%, but there's enough evidence that points to either we have it or we have repaired and are flying the ET craft. However, there's been so many kind of what seem to be human sightings, human craft that I doubt that. I don't think we have that many. So we have anti-gravitic craft. Okay, now, fine. They've negated gravity. But what's the energy source? It's possible that the theory behind negating gravity requires almost no energy. Just a couple of batteries and a couple of doodads and gadgets and boom. Common sense says that there must be a lot of energy involved in using that technology. But maybe not, but I would guess yes. So what kind of energy does the craft use? Well, however little it takes to fly the craft, we're pretty sure that it is not an energy source that we have. It's not batteries, it's not turbine engines or combustion engines, it's not rubber bands. It's an energy system we don't have. And therefore, it would be nice to know exactly what it is, just in case it could totally rock our world. All right. Guess what? The government says there are no ETs. And since there are no ETs, they don't have any crash vehicles. And since they don't have any crash vehicles and there's no anti-gravity craft in the sky, therefore there's nothing to tell you. So until the truth embargo ends, we're never going to see that technology. Well, that's an area that I like to get into sometimes without question. Whatever other technologies are in those vehicles, and there's obviously quite a bit, who knows? Philip Corso shook the tree really, really hard when he wrote The Day After Roswell and talks about tech taken from those craft, and then efforts were made to convey how they worked. I don't think they handed them, they might have handed them some hardware, but I think it was more they handed them the ideas, and they said that these are ideas that they'd gotten from foreign sources, meaning Russia, Soviet Union, rather. And they did this to provide a little help to our technology world so that our technology would be advanced. That's essentially what he was saying in that book, Day After Roswell. I happen to believe it's true. And so there's some text there that the information that influenced exactly, I think the book overstated that influence, but it influenced possibly some of the technology that has emerged over the last 60 years. Okay, fine. But and those texts are non-trivial if in fact there's an ET connection. Read The Day After Roswell, and you can get into that. But the two texts that are most important are propulsion and energy. We need to know what that is. If in fact the energy systems of that craft are simply not something we can use, in other words, it's simply not possible, for whatever reason, we either can't do it, we don't understand it, or we understand it, but there's no way we can execute it. If that's the case, then the government should tell us. But they can't tell us that because they can't end the truth embargo yet. So, because if we knew that, we would be a little easier to refocus elsewhere and go, okay, look, that's not going to help us, but we can go over here. And as far as the anti-gravitics, well, we know the anti-gravitics work, and we think they've got it. And I can spend hours talking about how anti-gravitic propulsion could significantly help the human race. All right, but we don't have time for that. So this technology issue and the sequestering of this technology behind the truth embargo was non-trivial. I like to use a hard analogy here, hard one, meaning it's not a soft analogy, but yet it's realistic enough that it should get your attention. It goes like this. US government research labs come up with an enzyme or a set of enzymes and proteins that they're able to confirm virtually annihilates almost any cancer that invades the human body. Maybe there's a few that it doesn't, but in most cases, most of the cancers that we have to deal with, it basically annihilates them. It's a cure for cancer. And it was derived within our secret facilities. And we have a lot of those, I assure you. A lot of bio research going on in our secret facilities. Some would say too much. So they meet about it deep down there in the secret skiffs, right? You know, where no one can hear. And they have very extensive discussions, highly intelligent, intellectual discussions amongst top scientists down there deep about what do we do about this? And someone does raise a national security point. And it goes like this. Population is already too high, and it's going to get higher. 9 billion is certainly a certainty. Others can talk 10, 11 billion. Some say it'll flatten at 12 billion. We already know the problems faced right now by 7.4 billion people. And it's only going to get worse because we're not dealing with those problems. So add another billion, and that's just 1 billion more problems. And upheaval and chaos and human suffering leads to political instability, which could lead to nuclear war. And so the point is raised that if we were to release this cure for cancer, it would extend the lifespan of perhaps a billion people, not just the ones now, but the ones coming up, and would almost certainly add to the population increase. Therefore, in the interest of national security, we will not let this out yet. we'll wait until the situation population-wise on the planet stabilizes and gets to a place where it's safe, or our overall resources that can deal with the population we have are such that it's not going to be too impacting to suddenly say, hey, we have a cure for cancer. And they do a discussion, and finally they agree. That's our policy. And then over the ensuing years, some people learn about this, some information comes out, somebody has a change of heart, or they just go to they leak some documents or what have you, and it starts to get around that the government has a cure for cancer. And they're not letting it out. It's sequestered. And the government makes a very concerted effort to deny that. No, we don't have a cure for cancer. That's a lie. It's not true. Don't have it. Anybody that says that is kooky. And this goes on for decades and decades. Until one day, so many people have figured it out, and there's so much information that the government is faced with a very, very difficult problem of finally confirming to the American people and the world, the last 40 years, we have had a cure for almost all cancers, and we did not release it for national security reasons, but now we can. You want to calculate the public relations problems that the US government would face under that analogy? You want to sort of parse that out? How people are going to handle it? How the press is going to handle it? It's going to be extremely unpleasant. Guess what? That exactly applies to the ET issue and the truth embargo. And while the public relations dilemma is not quite at the level of the analogy that I gave you, hiding a cure for cancer is pretty tough love. It's bad. And so what you are seeing unfold right now, and has been unfolding heavily for the last 4 years, is not quite what it seems. And we probably should wrap up here. I think it's a good place to end. It's not quite what it seems. It's not the government just discovered that, wow, this phenomena is real, or it may not, we can't explain it, or we need to study it, or any of that. That's all show. It's not true. They've known about it for decades, all back to the 40s. They've been studying it. They've been doing everything that you would expect them to do. It's just classified. It's not in public domain. So now these things are happening. Why? Because the government knows the truth embargo is going to end very soon. They've known that for 4 years. It could have ended easily 4 years ago, but various circumstances have delayed the end of this particular era of our history. And so everything they're doing now, every person that comes forward and suddenly has some positive things to say, a journalist, a scientist, a former CIA director, everything that is going on right now, by and large, is about people and institutions and services and agencies and what have you, trying to get on board and in front of the issue, in front of the disclosure process, in order to minimize the public relations problem that they inevitably are going to have to stare down. Because it's going to be a lot easier to face it if you've been doing something. You've shown that you were at least at the end cooperating, right? You weren't lying until the bitter end. You actually started giving in. And then they'll also say that, look, ultimately in the end, it needed to be this way. We couldn't just slam it down. It had to follow a proper path, which happens to be congressional hearings and a lot of journalistic coverage, and then a lot of powerful witness testimony, huge viewership, hundreds of millions of people watching and what have you, very transparent, and then leading to the president announced. That's the way it should be. And so all of that you're seeing happening, whether it's Rubio's action at the Intel committee, the call for the reports, the DOD, IG meetings with Lewis, all of this stuff is all about trying to get things in position and set up and properly postured so that when disclosure happens, the public's disaffection with government and the history of this issue will be minimal, and there will be lots of positives and winners, people that could say, thank you, boy, you're a winner, you're a winner, you're a winner, you're a winner. And then we move forward. It's what I call a public relations driven extrication process. That's what you're literally seeing happening. And extrication from what? Extrication out from under the truth embargo. There you go. Now you know.
Yeah, I completely agree. The longer they wait to do this, the more, exponentially increasing problems they're going to have to deal with.
Well, yeah, but now the problems are starting to get smaller because they are taking the right measures.
Right.
But when the current federal defense Defense Appropriations Act, National Defense NDA Act, that's about to be voted on the House, includes Section 162, which calls for this, and this, all very good, right, with respect to this issue. That report, this, that, how, but it's basically the same thing that was tasked to the rapidly set up Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force over at the Office of Naval Intelligence, which was just a show movement, just to have a mailbox or something. They had a couple people involved. It wasn't a big deal because that's not where it should be. It shouldn't be at the O&I. Guess where it should be? It should be in the middle of the Department of Defense. It should be in the Pentagon. Guess what? That's exactly what the language in the current bill, soon to be voted on, does. It moves everything over from the O&I to the Department of Defense, where they're going to set up a very large working group, and pretty much all the itemized areas that were assigned before are going to be assigned now to the Pentagon. Cool. And they talk about an annual report every year up until 226, and they're going to do this and do that. I mean, a lot of people look at it. Oh, okay, well, I guess we'll wait for these reports, and maybe by 2026 we'll know more, and perhaps something will happen. No way. Disclosure is coming. Hearings are coming, and that's the ball game. But interestingly enough, if you go online and you find the National Defense Act, and you find Section 162 and you read it, what you'll probably figure out is that, yeah, we need that office. And we need it doing these things, even after disclosure. There's almost nothing on that itemized list of things that are expected from the DoD regarding this issue that won't apply after disclosure. And so these things you're hearing are not about a lead up to disclosure. They are about getting ahead of the issue so that they can proceed after disclosure. We can have a reasonable response from the public. So again, nothing has happened so far that shortens the time frame for me. We are right there, and we would have already been there and had disclosure if it wasn't for some rather extraordinary developments that have taken place in the last 12 months. I respect that. I'm cool. I just hope no one else dies in the next few months. But I'm anticipating hearings soon. Those hearings will be military witnesses. The most important of those witnesses will be the nuclear weapons tampering witnesses and the nuclear weapons tampering issue, which of course was raised just recently by Robert Salas and his other colleagues, the National Press Club, for the second time. And it was filmed and it's on YouTube. And I assure you that film is going to get shoved eventually in front of the nose of every single member of every important committee in Congress, as well as sent to every news producer in the country by at least me. I mean, I'll do that, but I won't be the only one. And so those witnesses will be centerpiece. They will testify to the national security implications of the fact that ET craft have been turning our weapons on and off. They will also testify. I'm not aware of an exception here. I'm talking about the nuke witnesses. And there are many that will turn up that we don't even know about because they didn't want to come forward just to be part of the process or be in a book or something or a documentary. However, when hearings are held and they have the opportunity to come forward with a large audience and testify under oath before Congress with colleagues, I think you're going to see there's still a lot of living witnesses to those events that are going to choose to come forward. These will be the centerpiece. But a lot of people are going to be shocked when they do testify because they'll be asked about the threat potential of this phenomena, given that they turn on and off our nukes? And the answer is going to be, with few exceptions, that was not a threat. That was a message. And the message is, you have to get rid of the nukes. Now, I invite everybody, because we're about to end here. I got to go.
That's right.
Once this is over and then it gets archived, go back to the beginning of this interview and watch what listen to what I was saying about nuclear weapons, and then connect it to this, what I just said, and you'll start to see the big picture unfolding.
Absolutely. Appreciate that analysis. So I know you got to get going.
Yeah.
I heard you recently went bi-coastal out of DC and California. Do you have any plans that you can talk about for PRG? And then what are your closing thoughts?
All I could say is this, and I'm not a movie star with mansions or anything. I'm just saying, as of recently, I became bi-coastal. I have a place in the Washington area, very close to the action, obviously. And I have a place in West Hollywood, just 2 blocks from the orphanage where Marilyn Monroe grew up. And there's going to be some very significant announcements about why that happened, but not for a while. End of the month, 1st of November. We'll have to wait. And I'll be happy to interview after that. Come on and we can talk. But
Okay.
I got plans. I got big plans.
I love to hear it. I love to hear it.
It's about time I had some big plans.
Looking forward to what the future has to hold here on this issue and everything from PRG. So everyone, you can go and find Steve's work at paradigmresearchgroup.org and his introductory episode of the Disclosure Wire podcast at disclosurewire.org. Thanks, Steve, for joining. If there's anything else you want to say, go ahead. Appreciate your time.
All right. I just have this question, Jek.
Okay.
Did you give any consideration to Jek Blade Runner?
Oh, no. I used to use the Blade Runner font a lot, but
you didn't want to go all that way.
Yeah, a little bit of violence insinuated in that name. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's also sort of a play on Luke Skywalker, like transcending Star Wars. How we got to get away from the militarism in space. Sort of a play on that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Look, I think you're going to have a fine podcast. I think you're very smart, knowledgeable. I think you're serious about this, and happy to come back. Good luck. And as I say, I have a podcast, sort of. I've introduced it, but I haven't actually launched it. And so, as you probably figured out, there are so many podcasts now that most of the podcasts are podcasters interviewing other podcasters.
Right. I've noticed that. A lot.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly okay.
Yep.
All right, my friend. Good night. Good luck. And
great.
Get in touch.
Yep. Bye-bye. Thank you. Have a good night.